Picture this. You're standing in the great hall of a medieval castle. The stone walls tower above you, torches flicker in the dim light, and the smell of roasted meat mingles with wood smoke and unwashed bodies. A dog fights over scraps beneath the high table while nobles feast above. This was reality for thousands of people who called these massive fortresses home. Today, we're stepping back in time to discover what life was really like inside medieval castles, and trust me, it was nothing like the fairy tales suggest. Before castles were symbols of power or war, they were places where people lived, together. To understand medieval castle life, we first need to see them not as buildings, but as crowded communities where every role mattered. First, let's shatter a common misconception. Castles weren't just homes for kings and queens lounging on thrones. They were bustling, crowded communities. Think of them as self-contained medieval cities. A typical castle housed anywhere from 50 to 300 people during peacetime, and that number could explode during sieges or major events. The lord and his family occupied the best quarters, but they were vastly outnumbered by everyone else. Knights, squires, servants, cooks, grooms, blacksmiths, brewers, laundresses, chaplains, musicians, and guards. Each person had a specific role in keeping the stone machine running. The hierarchy was rigid and everyone knew their place. At the top sat the lord, usually a baron, earl, or duke, who owned the castle and surrounding lands. His word was law within those walls. Below him came his family, then his household knights who'd sworn loyalty to him, then the endless layers of servants and workers who made castle life possible. But here's what's fascinating. Despite the class divisions, everyone lived in remarkably close quarters. Privacy as we know it simply didn't exist. Most servants slept wherever they could find space, in hallways, kitchens, stables, or communal sleeping areas. Even nobles rarely had private bedrooms. The lord and lady might have a solar, a private chamber, but that was a luxury most couldn't afford. Living inside a castle might sound impressive, but status didn't guarantee comfort. Behind the stone walls and grand halls was a daily reality far harsher than most people imagine. Let's talk about what it felt like to live in a medieval castle, because Hollywood has sold us a lie. These were not cozy stone cottages with cheerful fireplaces. They were cold, damp, drafty fortresses built for defense, not comfort. The thick stone walls that protected inhabitants from arrows and siege weapons also trapped moisture and cold. Mold grew in corners. Condensation dripped down walls. Even with tapestries hung to provide insulation and block drafts, temperatures inside could be brutal during winter. People slept in their clothes, often with several others for warmth. Heating was a constant challenge. The great hall might have a central hearth, but the smoke had to escape through a hole in the roof or through crude chimneys, meaning the room was perpetually smoky. Other rooms might have fireplaces, but they were inefficient and consumed enormous amounts of wood. Servants had the exhausting job of constantly hauling firewood up narrow spiral staircases. And the smell. Medieval castles smelled terrible by modern standards, with limited bathing, no deodorant, smoky fires, cooking odors, animal waste from the stables, and the dreaded garderobe, the castle toilet that was basically a hole in the wall with a shaft leading down to a cesspit or moat. The air was far from fresh. Herbs and rushes were spread on floors to mask odors, but they also trapped food scraps and waste, creating their own problems. Speaking of the garderobe, using the toilet meant sitting on a cold stone seat with a hole, exposed to drafts from below, often shared by multiple people. No privacy, no toilet paper, people used moss, leaves, or cloth. The waste dropped into cesspits that had to be regularly cleaned out by workers known as gong farmers, one of the worst jobs imaginable. So what did life inside these walls actually look like? To understand that, we need to follow a single day from sunrise to nightfall inside a medieval castle. The castle day began at dawn, and I mean really at dawn, no sleeping in. The chapel bells rang for the first prayers, and everyone was expected to attend, from the lord down to the lowliest servant. Medieval people were deeply religious, and the daily rhythm revolved around prayer times. After morning prayers came breakfast, though not as we know it. The nobility might eat bread, cheese, and ale, yes, ale for breakfast, because the water was often unsafe to drink. Small beer and ale were consumed throughout the day by everyone, including children, though it was much weaker than modern beer. Servants grabbed whatever they could between their duties. The lord spent his morning handling administrative duties, settling disputes among his tenants, meeting with his steward about estate management, planning military obligations, or practicing warfare skills. Noblewomen managed the household staff, oversaw food production, arranged marriages for their children, tended to medical needs, and ran the entire castle when their husbands were away, which was often. The main meal of the day happened around mid-morning or noon. This is where castle life got theatrical. The Great Hall transformed into a complex social arena where rank determined everything: where you sat, what you ate, even what dishes you used. The lord and his family sat on the high table on a raised platform, sometimes under a canopy. They ate from silver plates and drank from goblets. Below them, knights and important guests sat according to rank, with the most favored closest to the high table. Servants and lower-ranking household members ate at the far end or in separate rooms, using wooden trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that served as edible plates. The food itself was surprisingly elaborate for the wealthy. Multiple courses included venison, wild boar, swan, peacock, beef, pork, fish on religious fast days, and an array of dishes heavily spiced to mask the taste of meat that was less than fresh. Sugar was rare and expensive, so honey sweetened desserts. Everything was served communal style, and people ate with knives in their hands. Forks weren't common in Europe until much later. But here's the kicker. While nobles feasted on this variety, the servants who prepared and served it often ate the leftover scraps, pottage, a thick soup or stew, and dark bread. Malnutrition among lower classes was common. Every hour inside a castle was shaped by duty. Survival depended on constant labor, but even in hardship, people still found ways to work, endure, and sometimes escape reality. After the midday meal, the castle buzzed with activity. Every corner had someone working. In the kitchens, cooks prepared the evening meal over massive open fires, roasting meat on spits that young boys turned for hours. The heat was intense, the work dangerous, and burns were common. Down in the castle cellars, the buttery and pantry workers managed beer, wine, bread, and dried goods. The chandler made candles, an endless task since the castle consumed hundreds per week. Laundresses faced perhaps the hardest job, washing mountains of linens, clothing, and table coverings by hand in cold water with harsh lye soap. Their hands were permanently raw and damaged from the work. But life was not all drudgery. Nobles had significant leisure time filled with entertainment. Hunting was their favorite pastime. It was sport, military training, and a food source, all in one. Hawking, where trained birds of prey caught smaller birds, was especially popular among noble women. Inside the castle, people played chess, backgammon, and dice games. They listened to traveling minstrels who brought news and entertainment from other regions. Jesters and acrobats performed. During feasts, musicians played while the nobles ate, and sometimes mystery plays or dramatic performances would be staged. Knights practiced their military skills constantly in the bailey, the courtyard. They engaged in mock combat, practiced with swords and lances, and participated in tournaments when the opportunity arose. These weren't gentle games. Injuries and deaths occurred regularly. Children in castles had very different childhoods than today. Noble children began formal training young. Boys were often sent to other castles as pages at age 7 to learn proper behavior and begin knight training. Girls learned household management, needlework, music, and how to run an estate. Servants' children worked from an early age, learning trades through apprenticeship. But no matter how organized castle life was, danger was never far away. Inside these walls, sickness, injury, and death were constant threats. Life in medieval castles was dangerous in ways modern people can barely imagine. Medical knowledge was primitive. A simple infection could kill you. Childbirth was a life-threatening thing for women, with maternal mortality rates around 1 to 2% per birth, and women had many children. Castle physicians relied on the theory of 4 humors: bloodletting, herbal remedies, and prayer. Some treatments worked by accident, but many did nothing or made things worse. Anesthesia did not exist, so amputations and surgeries were performed while the patient was awake and held down. Diseases spread rapidly in the close quarters. Typhoid, dysentery, tuberculosis, and the dreaded plague could sweep through a castle. During the Black Death in the 14th century, some castles lost half their inhabitants. There was no understanding of germ theory, so prevention was impossible. Fire was another constant threat. Despite being made of stone, castles contained massive amounts of wooden material, wooden furniture, tapestries, rushes on floors, thatched roofs on internal buildings. A single knocked-over candle could start a devastating fire. And, of course, there was war. Castles were military fortifications, and when under siege, life became a nightmare. Food supplies dwindled, disease spread faster in lockdown conditions, and the constant threat of breach meant terror for everyone inside. Some sieges lasted months or even years. Castles sometimes surrendered simply because they'd run out of food and water, with defenders reduced to eating horses, dogs, or worse.
At this point, the romantic image of castle life starts to fall apart. What remains is a much harsher truth about what it really meant to live behind stone walls. Here's the truth we need to understand. For all their grandeur, medieval castles were uncomfortable, dangerous, and exhausting places to live. The stone walls that seem so romantic today were cold and unforgiving. The simpler times were actually far more complex and brutal than we imagine. Social mobility was nearly impossible. If you were born a servant, you died a servant. Women had few rights and were essentially property, passed from father to husband through arranged marriages. Children were seen as miniature adults and put to work accordingly. Justice was harsh and public. Punishments like hanging, flogging, or being placed in stocks happened in the castle bailey for all to witness. Yet people adapted, found joy, formed relationships, and created culture within these limitations. They sang songs, told stories, fell in love, celebrated holidays, and built communities. The human spirit persisted even in harsh conditions. The castle system reflected medieval society perfectly, hierarchical, rigid, focused on military power, yet also capable of producing art, architecture, and administrative systems that laid groundwork for modern Europe. So when we look at castles today, quiet, empty, and beautiful, it's easy to forget what they truly were. To end this journey, we need to step back and see castle life for what it really was. So the next time you see a beautiful castle in a movie or dream about living in medieval times, remember the reality. The cold, the smell, the lack of privacy, the constant work, the danger, and the rigid social system that trapped people in their assigned roles. But also remember the human connections forged in those stone halls, the incredible resilience of people who survived and even thrived under difficult conditions, and the fact that these massive structures, many still standing today, represent thousands of years of human ingenuity and determination. Life in a medieval castle was hard, often brutal, and nothing like the fairy tales, but it was real, complex, and fascinating, a window into how our ancestors lived, worked, loved, and survived. If you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval castle life, hit that like button and subscribe for more historical content that digs beneath the surface to find the fascinating truth. Drop a comment below. Would you have wanted to live in a medieval castle? And if so, as a lord or a servant? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.